Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. We're going to have some discussion because I have a statement that I would like to read and maybe a comment or two to make. As president of the town council, just a couple of comments about this HRO. During the past several months, I've heard many comments on this topic, both positive and negative. Perhaps the most important idea being spoken about is the notion that this ordinance will create a special class or classes of people that will receive special treatment. This ordinance doesn't do that. In actual fact, it does exactly the opposite of that. This ordinance guarantees that no one will receive special treatment by making sure that no one is treated poorly, okay? The entire idea behind this ordinance is equality. The concept of equal treatment isn't anything new. I know we've heard about the Constitution tonight. I want to go back a little further and tell you that the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776 stated, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." On that day in history, over 200 years ago, we said goodbye to inequality and oppression through an oppressive government. And to uphold these principles, I think we have to remain vigilant. We've come a very long way, and I don't think we're at the finish line yet. I feel that this ordinance is a display of that vigilance. And frankly, as a more practical matter, this ordinance has received tremendous support from many of the town's employers, from the very large to the very small. Munster Community Hospital is the town's largest employer, and it is in support of this ordinance, as are so many others. I do appreciate everyone's comments, and I want to thank everyone for, frankly, for engaging in an open and spirited debate. That's also a lot of what America is about. You have to listen to people who disagree with you and people that make your blood boil, and you have to sit civilly and listen because they'll also sit civilly and listen to you. I think, thankfully, we're in a town that we have a sophisticated population and we can do that and not have rancor and people hanging from the chandeliers, and it's a great thing to see, frankly, because not every town is like that. So I know one of the other comments I heard tonight that I just wanted to address briefly was that the ordinance may be unnecessary because, hey, we don't discriminate anyway and this isn't a problem. And I say to that, then put your money where your mouth is. Pass an ordinance that says that rather than saying, well, we just don't do it. Well, then if we don't do it, then let's say we don't do it and let's back it up with something that's got some teeth. And I think that's another part of what this is about. But those are the comments that I have. I don't know if anybody else would like to speak on this.
I actually would like to say a few words.
No.
Good evening. Before we move forward, I have a few thoughts I'd like to share, and I thank you in advance for bearing with me. Again, I know the Blackhawks are starting, so.
Started.
During the months leading up to tonight's vote, I've listened to everyone who has spoken. I've met with everyone who has requested a meeting. I have read every email I've received from all sides of this issue. And I've repeatedly heard two phrases used to sum up the viewpoints in this issue. One, it's the right thing to do, and two, Munster doesn't need this ordinance. And these phrases, and as I look out, these phrases make members of both sides shake their heads emphatically in agreement and disagreement simultaneously, thus highlighting that these viewpoints are merely opinions. And though it's hard for members of either side to see how there can be any question about the validity of their viewpoint, the issue is not simply black and white. Your viewpoints and opinions are all important, and we should all be able to express those. At times, both sides intrigued me with logical and thoughtful discussions that were void of zealous words like absolutely and never. And those were the conversations that encouraged me to plod through the gray that often neither side can see. Above all, as a member of the Munster Town Council, I have a fiduciary duty to all of our residents. Therefore, I looked not only at the protection the ordinance provides to the LGBT community, but also analyzed its possible unintended negative consequences. I knew I could not vote yes for an ordinance that protected one's rights while trampling another's. The vote I cast tonight is not on a whim, is not simply to appease one side or the other. I have spent countless hours pondering the necessity of Ordinance 1674, discussing language with our attorney, and envisioning Munster's future. The spirit of Ordinance 1674 is simply to state that Munster does not accept discrimination. In my opinion, voting no on this ordinance will unnecessarily divide our small community and damage our reputation among our neighboring communities. I hope that however the final vote tallies, the so-called winning side will not mock the other side, because that type of behavior never brings the society together. It only promotes ill will. And my prayer is that everyone will come together and that we all take something more than a headline away from tonight's meeting. Thank you.
I also have a statement I'd like to make.
Dr. Coltranis.
Sorry, late gentlemen and ladies too. I lend my support to this legislation in response to the overwhelming support it received from the business community who favored it. The great town of Munster has always been a place to welcome new businesses, and we have always been a supporter of our business community. As a business owner, I'm mindful that no vote sends the wrong message to prospective businesses considering relocating within our community. We must do everything we can to support the growth of our local economy. I acknowledge the supporters of the legislation and their tireless effort to garner support of this law, and I acknowledge the dissenters of this legislation who embrace the view that this law is not needed in our good town. However, in the end analysis, I am guided by my business instincts and therefore support this law, as it is more likely to encourage economic development, and no vote is more likely to stifle economic growth within our community. As a legislative body, we should support legislation to encourage economic development, and my vote represents my commitment to economic stability and the growth of our town of Munster. Thank you.
Mr. President, if I might, I want to thank Amy and Ann for meeting with us, with Dr. Andy and myself last year, and the information you've provided. And I think at that time I said that in my opinion, because of the enormity of this issue, and I think we see it today with all the litigation that's going on and all the attempts to write ordinances and laws and that type of thing, it's a very, very complex issue. And we'd like to have it like we have with the ADA, civil rights and that, because we have uniform laws that are equally applied across this nation. Whoever violates that law are held to the same standards, the same penalties, and the same due process that ensures a fair hearing. And when we have every community across the nation writing their own version of this, it gets even more complex. And I was just reading again today about another source of litigation on restrooms and that. And it's an ongoing issue, but here we are faced with trying to deal with this at a local level. And as I read through this ordinance, because I was out of the country when it was first passed on first reading, I was not part of drafting this. I didn't know what was in it, and I've had time to review it and contemplate it. And I've got several things that concern me about how this ordinance is written. My first responsibility as an elected official is to all the residents of the town of Munster. And as I look through this, I'm very concerned about due process. When I look at section 2B, and it talks about what the town will do in the event of an accusation of breaching this ordinance and discrimination, we have no human resources director in this town that's had the education, the training, or the experience in dealing with human rights ordinances and issues. And so I think that puts us at a disadvantage, and once this passes and becomes law, I don't want the determination to be subjective. I want someone that can deal with this and know what they're dealing with and how to do it right. Because I think that's not only good for the non-LGBT community, but it's also good for those which are trying to seek protected status. The other item that I think is important is item 6, or D6. And I understand the explanation that was given here tonight, but the way I read that is that, and in my conversations with Amy and Ann and the other individuals that came to discuss this, when someone has a gender identity, and there's a man that feels like a woman and he has to use a man's bathroom, that really bothers him, and vice versa. And so consequently, I think that 6D needs to be rewritten where we provide the necessary restroom facilities, not only for an LGBT community, but also for those that are non-LGBT. And I think the one young lady's point was well made. a restroom is a very private thing that people do. And I think both sides need to be protected. And I think that 6D needs to be rewritten where we provide the necessary restroom facilities for each party that's concerned here. I also am concerned about all the ongoing litigation that I'm reading about across the nation. So this is not an isolated issue. It's not unimportant, and it costs dollars when you talk about litigation. So those things bother me. But I can support this ordinance if we hire, this town hires a human resources director that has the training, the education, and the experience in human rights ordinances. And if we rewrite that D6 to reflect that individual restrooms will be supplied to all people. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Seminette. Any further comments?
Yes. I don't want to be left out of the comments.
You don't have to go.
I do want to go. From the beginning, I have probably been a little bit non-committal to individuals. I've talked to a number of folks. Folks had asked to speak. I did. I read all the emails. I'm going to make a comment that I am disappointed that this human rights ordinance has not been taken up by the federal government or not taken up by the state. I do honestly believe that that's really where those need to reside. They need to deal with that. As Councilman Simonetto said, you need to have uniformity. It makes it difficult for individuals on a level such as the human rights ordinance to have different states, different communities, have different rules, different regulations. Traveling with your vehicle, it's pretty good that we have state laws that are somewhat uniform in terms of speeds and turning on right and red stop signs and things like that. It's nice to have consistency, but I'm also seeing that that's not happening, and it's unfortunate. And again, I've listened to both sides, and I do appreciate the fact that we've had both sides presented here. We have had a work study in which information was given to us, and it has come to a point that I have formulated a decision that I do believe that in the best interest for our community to be able to move forward, that I can support this ordinance. And I also recognize the fact that this is a living, breathing document. It's not something that you look at once and there it is. It is something that we do from time to time, review our ordinances and if necessary make changes. We've had some areas where we've set fines at one level, and because it made sense at the time, we've had to go back and maybe reduce that fine, or in cases we've gone through and increased the amount of a fine because it was originally read as an ordinance 25 or 30 years ago, and it's time with today's inflation to set those at a different level. So I do recognize that it is a living and breathing document. And again, it's something that we want to represent the community. And as was said earlier, Munster does not discriminate. I believe that. I believe what we say when we say the Pledge of Allegiance. And, you know, I will say this, that I was born here in Indiana, in the northwest section, East Chicago. I am part of the melting pot. I am a second generation American. And we all are looking for the same thing, to have the opportunity to live our lifestyle with our neighbors and have reasonable consideration of the community and have that opportunity. So with that, I'll finish my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Anyone else? Anything further?